safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cedar.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, March 9th, 2020. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Assistant Professor of Political Science at UC Irvine, author of The Anger Gap, How Race Shapes Emotion in Politics, Davin L. Phoenix will be with us. Also on the program, on the eve of 6 key primaries, Joe Biden opens a big lead in the polls. Shall see. Meanwhile, Biden launches a super PAC as the DNC changes the rules of the next debate format to make Joe feel a little more comfortable. Meanwhile, Booker and Harris endorse Biden. Jesse Jackson endorses Bernie Sanders. Warren still on the sidelines. Meanwhile, at the White House, Mick Mulvaney jettisoned Mark Meadows' new chief of staff. As the main question is, will we follow or exceed the Italian glide path as COVID-19 causes 19 million people to be quarantined in northern Italy? And the White House overrules the CDC attempt to warn elderly not to fly. Meanwhile, CPAC and APAC cause congressional self-quarantines, and Pelosi and Schumer urge paid sick leave for victims, while Bernie will be holding a COVID-19 roundtable in Detroit. Tom Friedman's best friend, MBS, detains his family in a Saudi power grab.
It's happened a couple times before, hasn't it?
Yeah, why not? Extended family now. Former Blackwater head, or I should say, head of the former Blackwater. I don't know what they're calling it this week, Jay or something like that. Betsy DeVos's brother, Eric Prince, has been recruiting ex-spies to work with James O'Keefe and Project Veritas.
Academi is
Academi. They just change it every 6 weeks. And the yield curve drops below 1% for the first time ever in history. We will explain why that's probably not a good thing, and more.
Line goes down, folks.
On today's program, apparently the stocks suffered their worst drop since 2011, just moments ago. It's a crap storm, ladies and gentlemen. We got a lot. I mean, today is it's a crap stormy day. I'm not going to lie to you.
It's going to be a crap stormy week.
It's going to be a crap stormy week.
Happy birthday to me.
I was just about to say that, Jamie. I was just about to work that in.
Aw.
Yeah, I had it right here on the top of my sheet. Happy birthday, Jamie.
I'll pretend I didn't say anything.
Hey, folks, my son had his birthday this weekend, but today is Jamie's birthday. What better way to celebrate than to be here on a day where we're like in the the build up to the COVID-19 panic, and also the Michigan and Washington State panics for Bernie's campaign.
Yeah, well, if one of us dies, I'm really gonna miss you guys. So let's get it while we can.
Exactly. Let's we're gonna make this the best birthday ever. We will talk about all that and more later in the program. I guess we could do this. I mean, folks, we are about a week away from really getting a sense, maybe a week and a half from getting a sense of just like how much, what we're going to be facing in this country on some level. If you look at the Italian glide path, I mean, we'll talk about it in a bit. Let's go. Let's skip this one and go to the one that we were originally going to do, because stocks are falling because just I think coincidentally, I think an OPEC deal fell apart and oil prices are dropping precipitously. That is going to impact the U.S. economy significantly because a lot of our fracking in the Dakotas, I believe, survives because of the price of oil. When the price of oil becomes too low, it's just not worth it to spend all this money to frack. Good for the planet. Going to be tough on the economy at a time where we're about to hit, I think, a major problem with our economy because of COVID-19. Lost time at work, lost productivity. They're canceling, all sorts of conferences, tourism. There's all sorts of industries where I think you're going to see basically just take a powder.
South by Southwest canceled.
South by Southwest canceled. A lot of productions you're going to see are going to be canceled, particularly like commercial productions, whatnot. That's going to hurt in a lot of areas. But I mean, across the board, we're going to see a lot of this. But don't worry, Donald Trump is on the case. We will get to that later. But here is Donald Trump. There was a major tornado in Tennessee. And he could actually be down there for a rally, or at least in that area. I'm not 100% sure about it. Or he could have just decided, like, I need to go show leadership. And here is Fox News capturing some of that leadership. Folks, Donald Trump is nuts in a myriad of ways. But one of the ways that I think he is nuts relative to other human beings is his sociopathy, right? Is this sociopathy or psychopathy? I mean, and look, I'm not being clinical here. I don't know. But it is stunning, his inability to be aware of other people's pain. And here he is. He has latched on to a story of a boy who got lifted up in the midst of the tornado and deposited like 2 blocks away. And he wants this to be about a miracle that could only happen to this boy in this tornado.
It's a special time.
At a time when he's president. Just because it's Trump time. It's a Trump miracle. Here it is. And just listen to what he has to ignore to maintain this narrative.
Whatever you can do, it's tough. A lot of them have lost people within the family. One family got entirely wiped out. There was one case, though, I heard a young man was, an 8-year-old boy was ripped out, flown to a certain area, and dropped off at the street 2 or 3 blocks away. And they found him walking. And he said, I just flew in the air. And he was walking down the street 2 blocks away from his home. And how did his parents do?
We're not for sure exactly how they turned out. They were found deceased.
They were deceased.
He was the only surviving member of the household. Lost his sibling as well.
So it took him, and he said, I was carried by the air away from my house. He came back. But his
the house over there and dropped in the neighborhood back behind.
He was over there. And his parents were killed.
And sister.
And his sister. So we're going to go see some of the folks.
I mean, so you really just stepped on my whole story about the because that was a pretty great story.
A lot of them were entirely wiped out, but one of these had a sort of Harry Potter situation of the boy who lived and he was floated 2 blocks down. His entire family was wiped out, but anyway, think about what it must have been like to have been that kid just
flying around.
Maybe there's some cows also flying around in a
It's
puppy.
a real Trump miracle. Just ignore the other part. Just ignore the other part because that's in the way of the story.
Imagine Obama saying like, "Yeah, one of those families was wiped out." Just entirely wiped out.
Yep. But there was that story about the kid who floated like a witch.
200 yards.
Alice. I mean, what's that?
It's the Wizard of Oz.
Wizard of Oz. That's right. And then what happened with the other family? They died.
Oh,
they're deceased.
But anyway, still cool about the kid, right?
Yeah, right. But there's still that's pretty amazing. Unbelievable. That's
unfortunately though. I was making this point. I think it might be good propaganda value for his. Like it leaves that image for his types of followers of just like, oh, that kid. It's kitsch, right?
Right.
Like
yes. I mean, and that may be the case. But what's really more relevant, I think, is like now you understand how this guy could basically be running the government as a way of like, let's just keep a lid on talking about this COVID-19 thing, because that's the most important thing. It's going to go away eventually. And if people don't realize it's happening, that's not going to work. And, we're going to talk more about what's happening with the primary and whatnot. But to the extent that Donald Trump's political fortunes are, to the extent that there's anything that is out of Donald Trump's reach, it's quite possible that the implications of the coronavirus, both in terms of like, I mean, look, you have the flu, people die every year, and there's only so much you can do about that. The response to this has been so flawed that there is undoubtedly going to be hundreds, if not thousands, probably thousands of people who will die because of the response. In any situation, we were going to have people die. But because this response has been so poor, we will have thousands more who will die. We will have a tragedy in that respect. We're also going to have a major shock to our economy. The biggest problem is, of course, that we do not have the capacity, the added capacity that we need. We do not have, particularly because, our system is so for profit. And I imagine this is the case with a lot of other places. To some extent, China, they can build within 3 days, it seems, like they can create an extra 1,000-bed hospital in any given place. We don't have the ability to do that. And we have no extra capacity in the system. The system is built with an awareness of how many people are going to need beds, how many people are going to need X, Y, or Z type of treatment because of the flu. In this instance, this is an add-on, and we do not have the capacity to deal with the potential of this add-on. And so the whole game plan is you mitigate and you sort of try and spread the sickness out over time so that at least your system can sort of absorb it. It's not coming in one big sort of chunk, as it were.
They're talking about like Manhattan morgue capacity, for instance, like things like that.
And beds and morgue and whatnot. I mean, it's just not there. And part of the problem is is that we're not moving quick enough to the mitigation strategy because we don't have the ability to tell where we are in the growth of the disease because of the failure of our government to perceive this. We had as much time as probably any country out there, frankly, any industrialized nation, and to do anything about it, to create a testing regime, to adopt the World Health Organization testing if necessary. But we didn't do any of that. And frankly, across the board, we were sitting here from the last debate, which was 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we were saying, like, why aren't the Democratic candidates making more of this? It should be. Something more should be made of it because, a little bit of concerted reading would have told you, like, something's coming. It was, I think the first story we reported on this that made our, headlines, I think, was that plane that was come back where the Trump administration overrode the CDC recommendation. And one gets the sense that there's a whole lot of that going on. But we will talk more about that as the show progresses, and we'll get into, I think this, the author we have today on the anger gap, I think it's very apropos for basically where we are. But let me just tell you a little bit about my betting. Yeah. I think this is one of the things that I have come to realize as I am older now. Small changes to what you do on your everyday life can make a big difference in just the way you feel, the way you approach your life. The right towel makes you feel better in the morning slightly, then you don't yell at your kids or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's also kind of the only luxury available to millennials, I think, is like, let's buy a slightly nicer version of the thing you already need.
I think that's true. But I'll tell you something. Here's the benefit with Brooklinen. You can make all these upgrades with Brooklinen, and it's not going to cost you a fortune. Brooklinen is the internet's favorite sheets. They're also home to bedding, loungewear, towels, with more than over 50,000 five-star reviews and counting. And now they have all of those life essentials, Jamie, that you were talking about. Shower curtains, bath mats, robes, totes, the final details that make your big upgrade. And the thing for me that I like, I'm a huge fan of all the bedding. I'm about to move into the towels thing. That's my next purchase. But all the bedding, I will say, is this. Feels great. Looks great, does not break the bank. And it's luxury bedding. And I used to skimp on these things and just not even think about it, really. And Brooklinen actually makes it easy for me not to think about it anymore and get top quality stuff. Brooklinen.com is the perfect place to start making small changes that makes big differences. Brooklinen is so confident in their product that all their sheets, their comforters, I got a bunch of those, both sheets and comforters from them now. Loungewear and towels come with a lifetime warranty, so go on, make yourself comfortable. Get 10% off your first order and free shipping when you use the promo code MAJORITY only at Brooklinen.com. That's Brooklinen.com, promo code MAJORITY. And hey, New Yorkers, if you're listening, you can get the internet's favorite sheets and more in real life. You can visit Brooklinen's first store in Brooklyn at 127 Kent Ave. That's in Williamsburg, right off the BQE. Brooklinen, everything you need to live your most comfortable life. Folks, I think you know that my style is one just generally a little bit more like function over form, probably, I would say. But I've been upgrading. I don't know how you would describe your style in one word. Simple, sophisticated, adventurous. Well, however you dress, stylists at Stitch Fix can help you find your new favorite piece. Stitch Fix is an online personal styling service. It delivers your favorite clothing, shoes, and accessories directly to you. First, what you do is you go online, you complete a style profile. They ask you questions about what kind of clothes you like, et cetera, what type of brands. Then an expert personal stylist will send you a hand-picked box of items based on your preferences. They have men's, they have kids' boxes, they have women's boxes. No subscription is required. You can pick between automatic shipments or only getting new stuff on demand. Shipping, exchanges, and returns are always free. Plus, the $20 styling fee is automatically applied to anything you keep from your box. So I got my first box, what was this? I don't know, about a month and a half ago. And for me, the two biggest finds were these Penguin, I don't know how do you describe them, desert boots? They're a little bit more nicer than that, but they're that style. They're nice, like boot shoe, as it were. Like that's the problem I have. I don't even know what to call these things. And I wouldn't know to pick them out. And so I say broadly what I like to the stylist, and they send me these, my favorite new pair of like semi-dressy shoes. I mean, for me, everything is dressy, and I got a pair of Flag and Anthem pants that I love. I have a tough time finding pants that I like. It's great. Now you can get started today at stitchfix.com/majority. Get an extra 25% off when you keep everything in your box. That's stitchfix.com/majority for an extra 25% off when you keep everything in your box. And lastly, as you know, it's an election year, which means it's time again for us to hire a president of the United States. And I think in many of your perspectives, fire one. But you know it's difficult to determine who is the most qualified. Maybe not for a lot of us, but there's some controversy as to it, maybe amongst our listeners, between two people. I mean, I like to think we have a broad audience. But even if you research it, each political candidate, for a lot of people, it's very difficult. Thankfully, not every role is this difficult to fill, especially when you have ZipRecruiter. Today, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/majority. This is like the ad where they should have included us, right? They talk because we talk about politics, and one of our top hires, he's definitely in our top quartile of hires, came from ZipRecruiter. What they do is they send your job to over 100 of the web's leading job sites, and they don't stop there. They have this matching technology. They scan thousands of resumes for people with the right skills, people with the right experience, and then ZipRecruiter actively invites them to apply. It is so effective, ZipRecruiter, that 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. Day one, ladies and gentlemen. So you could try ZipRecruiter for free. My listeners can go to ZipRecruiter.com/majority. That's ZipRecruiter.com/majority, MAJORITY. ZipRecruiter.com/majority. ZipRecruiter, it is the smartest way to hire. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Davin Phoenix about his book, The Anger Gap, How Race Shapes Emotion in Politics. We'll be right back after this. Sam Cedar on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program Assistant Professor of Political Science at UC Irvine, author of The Anger Gap, How Race Shapes Emotion in Politics, Davin L. Phoenix. Welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
So Davin, let's start with well, I guess let's start with just the concept of the anger gap. Like, what? Just walk through, or maybe we should just start with the idea of like, let's talk about the anger gap and how anger is, or what the conventional wisdom is that makes politicians appeal to anger.
Sure. So I think we're no strangers to anger operating in politics. Excuse me. On both sides of the aisle, you kind of see people responding to threats that make them feel indignant, and that kind of indignation over those threats makes them more likely to take action in politics. And we can break down what makes anger such a palpable emotion that can make people kind of move off the sidelines onto the playing field. You know, when I'm angry, I feel slighted. I feel like someone or something has violated some kind of norm, and I want to right that wrong. I feel an overwhelming motivation to restore order. And so I'm going to be more impulsive. I'm going to be less risk averse, more willing to act now and think about the consequences later. I like to joke with my students. You know, how many of you have ever said, oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. I was angry. But in that anger state, you know, we're ready to take action. And so we're no strangers to seeing politicians make appeals to people to get out and vote, or to donate, or to canvass, to make things right, to change that dissatisfying status quo. So I wanted to really explore whether all racial groups kind of respond to the same sets of threats, the same sets of dissatisfying status quos with that anger. And I'm finding, no, it's not the case. I'm looking at kind of presidential candidates, or partisan animosity, or kind of 2016, that storm in general. I'm finding African Americans expressing a lot less anger over those kinds of objects and targets than their white counterparts. And that has real consequences when we're thinking about Black participation. Specifically in elections, not only are Black people not participating, but expressing less anger than white folks, but when they are expressing that anger, it is not translating as effective to political actions, particularly actions shaping elections.
Okay, so let's and I want to just like go take a couple of steps back first by when we measure this, like this concept of there's two elements, right? It's like how much anger is any given set of politicians in any given year sort of offering, and then how much of it is being received. I mean, do we have a sense of like, have there been elections where the politicians are sort of using anger more or less over the years? How fluid is that? And then I want to ask the sort of the receiving question as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. We can certainly see that the effectiveness of any kind of appeal to anger is largely going to rest on the circumstances around people, right? So what are people evaluating political actors, particularly at the national level, on? I mean, well, it's the economy, stupid, right? That's the kind of the primary thing. When times are particularly tough, it's easier for the candidates, particularly those on the outside looking in, to draw up that sense of anger. But also we can think about other indicators of restlessness, right? So of course we have plenty of restlessness right now between disease epidemics, tanking economy, and just, you know, continued reserves of resentment, and bitterness over the Trump administration. So appeals to anger are going to be much more effective here than they were in, say, 2012, when certainly you had some your typical kind of incumbent fatigue for Obama, and you had an economy that was slowly but steadily recovering. Anger appeals aren't going to be that effective, and I think we can look back on Romney's campaign and see he wasn't able to necessarily make credible appeals.
Hello? Bear with us, folks. Was it not an audio hookup, or did we lose connection? Will you take a look at the... will you text him and see if we... Okay. Yeah, let's go to music for a second. Apologies. So you were saying about Romney.
Sure. So when we look at the 2012 election year, we saw Romney was not able to really rely very strongly on appeals to anger, because beyond the kind of resentment or conservative backlash towards Obama represented by the Tea Party, in the general election climate, there wasn't that much to be angry about. The economy was slowly but surely recovering, and beyond your typical incumbent kind of fatigue with Obama, there wasn't that many unsettling events or circumstances to create that sense of, something's wrong, it needs to be righted. And so perhaps we can see some of that manifesting in Romney's struggles in 2012, not being able to rely on kind of a fervent, indignant base of people really dissatisfied with the status quo. So yeah, to answer your question, we can see anger appeals being more or less effective depending on kind of how many credible threats there are to people's satisfactory status quos in any given political, economic, or even global environment.
And let me ask this before we get into sort of the meat of what you look at from a party perspective, right? I mean, and largely like you can't really talk about the cohort of black folk when you're talking about the Republican Party. You can, but it just seems, I don't know if, like, statistically speaking, it's a valid sample. Maybe it is to a certain extent, but I mean, do we see did you have any look into a potential gap between parties?
I did. And so I find that typically Republicans are a bit more likely to express anger towards the out party than Democrats. And I think that squares with what we might expect about the Republican Party, kind of being a party that seems to be animated more by anger or resentment. And what's interesting is that the Republican Party, of course, has control over many of the levers of political power. But as I saw a commentator say the other day, there still is a great deal of anger over the perceived lack of conservative or Republican control over kind of the popular discourse, right? Over popular culture and that, right? And so that we can even see that be kind of manifested. I'll never forget a few years back, quite a few years, I'm dating myself, the early 2000s, during the W. Bush era, at, I think, a nominating convention, they did, the Republicans, a big thing where they kind of did a Star Wars analogy, and the Democrats were their evil empire. And it's like the Republicans controlled the Senate and the House and the presidency at that time. If anyone's the empire, it's them, right? But what are they pushing back against? The sense that they don't necessarily control the national discourse the way that they want it. So the Republican Party has been very effective at identifying things there they don't have control, they don't have power, and really animating a sense of anger about that. Even if you look at the political landscape, they do have quite a bit of control and power and influence.
And so moving into the sort of the heart of your work here, I mean, part of that could be a function of the fact that their party is largely, I mean, mostly white people. Right. And so let's talk about the specifics of the anger gap. We're talking about a gap between the inclination or the ability, and talk about how those two things interplay between white people's inclination / ability to express anger within the political realm and black folks' ability to do so. And then, obviously you do the work as well on Latinos and Asians, but let's just stay there. Like, what are we talking about? Does a sense of what accounts for the ineffectiveness, as it were, or the lack, if it is, or the subjugation of that anger within the electoral context amongst black people?
For sure. So when many African Americans are kind of looking at the political landscape, they are calculating a very different response to their expressions of anger. You can think about that large stereotype or archetype of the angry black man, the angry black woman, and how that creates a level of scrutiny or stigma that everyday white people might not get for expressing anger in the same or even more intensive ways. So we can think anecdotally, right? African Americans will be looking at a Trump rally and looking at the folks, kind of yelling and screaming at media members present and screaming, lock her up, and, having those kind of incendiary signs and cursing people out. And they think, oh, there's no way on God's green earth I could ever get away with, or a group could ever get away with having that kind of rally. Right? Black people can look at history and think about the ways in which Black movements, whether they're radical movements like the Black Panther Party or even nonviolent passive resistance movements like the Civil Rights, were infiltrated by the FBI and came under intense scrutiny by law enforcement and by media. All of this sends a very clear message. Then we can think about the realm of popular culture, the stigmatization of angry Black athletes being told to shut up and dribble, or the Obama anger translator sketch on Key and Peele, right? What's the takeaway from that long-running sketch? Even the African-American individual in the highest office in the land can't actually deign to show anger without penalty. So he has to outsource that, right, to his employee Luther. So we have this kind of long-running understanding, right, that the costs are really different. Those costs are unequally imposed on Black folks. And so I argue and find evidence, sure enough, that's weighing on the minds of African Americans. So when they're looking at the political landscape, they're thinking, yeah, even if I am dissatisfied by this, even if I feel more targeted by this, more vulnerable to this threat than my white counterparts, I can't necessarily show that grievance in the same way. It's not going to be met with the same affirmation. And so that's a significant part of the anger gap. And I think the other significant part is, in order to feel angry about something, I have to see something as a threat in the first place. I have to see it as something that is a violation or a departure from the norm. And then we have to consider the broader ways in which Black people think about politics. When they're looking at things that can get white folks up in arms, are Black people seeing that thing as the system departing from the norm, or are they seeing that as the norm itself? And so given those very tempered expectations Black people tend to carry, given that viewing politics through a racialized lens leads them to think, the system is less responsive to Black people's demands, it's less fair, it's less transparent, it's less just, then I argue there's a sense of resignation, right, tied to a lot of things that might animate anger amongst other folks. And that's really critically important, too. And really critically important is about the kinds of appeals, the kinds of campaigns, messages that African Americans might be responsive to, and those that really don't strike that responsive chord.
Well, one of the things as you're talking, I'm reminded of a book. I know we interviewed him, I think, at the time that it came out. Randall Kennedy wrote about the persistence of the color line, and this was about Obama's constraints as in terms of expressing anger. When we see African American electorate, there's a certain amount, like you say, or you're right, I should say, there's a certain amount of resignation that sort of short circuits the anger, and there's a certain amount of of sense of I guess sense of futility, maybe, in terms of getting angry. So what has there ever been a time where it has had an electoral difference, or is this just something that over time has been a consistent feature?
Yeah, so I'm able to look at some nationally representative data going back to 1980, right? So I can kind of trace these trends and express anger and political participation from Reagan all the way up through this dawn of the Trump era. And I'm certainly finding that even looking at kind of Black Democrats and white Democrats and comparing them, right, and kind of holding them equal on every kind of dimension except whether they're expressing anger towards the other party or not. And I'm finding clear differences with Black Democrats expressing much less anger despite expressing more dissatisfaction with those Republican incumbents and candidates. And also the anger that's expressed by Black Democrats and white Democrats having very different effects on their likelihood of turning out. So it's essentially a completely non-effect on whether Black Democrats turn out or not. And it's a marginally positive effect on white Democrats' likelihood to turn out. And so when we kind of look at that, we can understand why the Black-white turnout gap generally tends to widen under Republican incumbents rather than close. You would imagine if Black Democrats in particular feel particularly threatened by those Republican incumbents, then they'll step up their participation. That's what the conventional wisdom says, right? When you're threatened, you're going to be more likely to act. But if you're not responding to that threat with anger, and I'm finding they're not, then you might not feel more inclination to act. And so we can certainly see the anger gap at least play some type of discernible role in Republican presidents winning more often than not, the last 30 or 40 years. And I think that speaks to a conventional wisdom that obscures the reality about how African Americans are responding to these climates of partisan or political threat. And so, I can't put any number on, well, turnout decreased by this much potentially amongst Black voters, and that would have been the difference. But when we look at margins of victory that have been incredibly narrow, particularly in 2016, it's not hard to imagine that if Black turnout was more animated by the particular threat being positive that year, then it likely would be enough to turn at least one or two battleground states. And in some of these elections, that's more than enough to change the outcome.
Right. I mean, we've talked about, Detroit. We've talked about Milwaukee. We've talked about Philadelphia, where you had, decreased turnout relative to what it was in, let's say, 2008, even 2012, amongst the African American community. I mean, so, does that, how much of that is applicable to 2020? I mean, in 2016, a lot of this stuff was hypothetical, right? I mean,
right.
It was Donald Trump is, acts racist, or Donald Trump talks racist, or, some of his followers are racist, but, this is, people should be, it was harder to be, I think across the board for people to perceive the threat as being real. Everybody was under the assumption, not everybody, but, certainly the conventional wisdom was that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and Donald Trump had a 15% chance of winning. That's a hard thing to get exercised about, unless,
right.
Unless that 15% pays off, that bet. But how much of it is a function of like how real the stakes are in terms of anger, or is it not a question of how real the stakes are, but the emotional response to those stakes?
Yeah, I think it's more so the latter. I think African Americans have given two significant indicators about Trump, right? I think the first one to really kind of internalize for us better understanding what we can expect in terms of turnout across the diverse Democratic coalition in 2020 is that when polled, African Americans don't necessarily see Trump as so much worse or so much distinct, right, from a status quo. And I think that speaks volumes, right, or just about how kind of resigned or pessimistic or fatalistic, right, African Americans are about the political context, that many people can see Trump and say, wow, this is a level of open prejudice, right, and animosity and racism that we are not accustomed to. And this is such a departure from even some of the more implicit ways people communicate racist messaging or enact racist policies. African Americans are saying, whether it's implicit or out in your face, right, we kind of expect the system to produce these kinds of outcomes. So he might be a bit more advanced, but he's certainly not so departing from the norm. And I think that doesn't bode well in terms of thinking about an energized Black turnout. But at the same time, certainly see Black people work to preserve and kind of, well, I should say, to kind of maintain a sense of perseverance. And so even if the specter of 4 more years of Trump does not incite the same emotional intensity, that doesn't mean Black people aren't acutely aware of the continued threats to their well-being that his presidency can represent. And so I think the nuance there really forces the Democrats contending for the Black vote to think about the messaging not being as simple as, well, look, here's the boogeyman that we could posit. Here's all the ways in which you need to act to, stave off that boogeyman. Like, doesn't this frustrate you? Doesn't this anger you? Doesn't that excite you? In my research, I find that messages that are more effective at getting out the vote amongst African Americans are messages rooted in hope and even more prominently pride. And I think it's very possible. In fact, I think it's necessary for the Democratic contenders to be able to craft a message that can instill a sense of community pride within African Americans, even in the face of the existential threats represented by Trump. But it's certainly not the case that you can simply animate this group by relying on the same kind of appeals to anger that will much more effectively animate the white members of the Democratic base.
So when we hear, when we hear the story, the narrative that that Joe Biden is appealing to African Americans, and largely, this has been tested only basically in the South, right? And maybe there's some regional differences that maybe you could speak to that, and maybe there aren't. But when we hear that Joe Biden is appealing to African Americans in the South, it is because they know the stakes of this, and they think Joe Biden is most likely to win. Is that consistent with your research, or is it perhaps that there's something else going on in terms of Joe Biden that your research sort of would cause us to focus on?
Sure. So I definitely think the narrative about Black voters choosing Biden as the more electable candidate, it's important to think about how African Americans do think strategically and pragmatically, but, African Americans are not purely strategic actors, right? Like any other group. They're also thinking about who can better advance, preserve self-interest. So kind of my research would read the differences in what Biden and Sanders craft as their dominant messaging. And I think that Sanders' messaging about speaking to the ills of the system, right, and seeking to animate a sense of indignation about people who are like, enough is enough, right? It's our time to really demand greater economic justice and equity of opportunity, and even out the playing fields. We've seen that very, very powerfully motivating for his base, particularly young people across the color line, right? Black young people are just as responsive to that message as any of the young folks. And indeed, I find this particular cohort of young Black Americans, which I looked at as those 29 and under, they don't really exhibit that anchor gap. Right. And that's not a factor of just being young in general, because when I look at young people in past eras, they are exhibiting that same anchor gap. So I think this particular set of young folks is different. And I think, why are they different? I'm sure there's a different set of expectations when you've had a Black president for much of your life, right? You have a different set of entitlements, and I think you have different kind of changes for this generation that makes anchor potentially more salient for them. And that's great for Sanders, but the problem is, right, are they going to be likely to vote? And so far, we haven't seen that youth turnout really increase. In fact, it's a little diminished. So I think older Black folks, the appeal to Biden is probably rooted in that sense that when they're hearing those appeals from Sanders, it's not engendering, right, that same anger. It's just kind of animating that sense of resignation. Yeah, Sanders, we understand that the system's unjust, but it's always unjust, right? So that doesn't really move the needle for us. And I think Biden, by crafting just a kind of a more traditional middle-of-the-road message, right, is able to speak in a language that, even if they're not necessarily moved by, inspired by, they're just more familiar with. There's a comfort level there. And so, if I were advising Sanders on ways to better connect with Black voters, I would think about how he can tweak that messaging so he's not simply highlighting the ills that he's looking to rally against, but also highlight the ways in which Black communities, particularly the older Black, have been incredibly resilient in the face of these threats, and to really acknowledge that for Black people, what he's talking about is not like this new thing, but it's something that they've considered, a part of their lives for generations or decades, right? How can he speak to that and give them that sense of, hey, I acknowledge that what I'm saying that is getting other people out of their seats might not get you out of your seats because you've been living with this your whole life. Right. But here are the ways I can acknowledge and admire how you've been fighting against it. And here are the ways I can kind of take how you've been fighting against this at this localized community level and make that a national movement.
I would imagine. There's a couple of things that I want to talk about, because I want to talk about the durability of that change. It's fascinating theory, the idea that that on some level, younger African Americans have a higher expectations because of Obama, or maybe because of just generational shifts. I mean, I think we had the baby boomers were sort of dominating our culture for a long time. I would imagine bringing a similar perspective as their parents, which is you're talking now, pre-New Deal folks growing up in that era, growing up in Jim Crow, still with that sort of like sense of, of maybe on some level of resignation to, or maybe resignation is not the right word, but a sense that like, there's something systemic here, and, expecting more out of these politicians is a fool's errand on some level. I want to swing back to that, but I want to stay with is the message that you're talking about. Is there also something? Is Sanders inhibited by his issues with Obama in that he cannot sort of like play to African American pride in Obama as a president in the way that Biden can?
So I think that's a really good question, right? To what extent is that Sanders always kind of held back by that, constrained by that? Because as much as he can tout, right, the good of Obama, he can never have that more intimate connection. But I think what's really critical is that I think Biden's ability to benefit from his his Obama connection goes deeper than simply being the VP. I've been thinking a lot about, ground game and that real, not very sexy, but very critical work of just mobilizing people in communities. And one thing that I think gets lost about Obama is the intentionality of going into Black neighborhoods that had often been ignored by national Democratic campaigns, either due to, people with not very consistent records of voting, or particularly neighborhoods with higher than average rates of former felons, which may or may not be eligible to vote, and saying, hey, those votes that are able to come out of those neighborhoods matter, right? So I think that's really critical for Obama being able to successfully build up that multiracial coalition, right? Simply having a very broad approach to the ground game. So I think definitely Biden still benefits from that, because you think about the institutional memory from those neighborhoods, right? It's like this was a set of folks that came to us and implored us to vote and told us about the value of our voices when others hadn't given us that. And so I'm hearing about which campaigns are spending in which areas, but I think there are still some reverberating effects that Biden gets to benefit from because he's connected to that element of Obama, right, and not just the Obama presidency.
So also the entire Obama operation on some level. I mean, because Biden, as far as I can tell, has no ground game. I mean, and honestly, like I like just the number of offices, the number of people who are canvassing seems to be sort of shockingly limited, and yet doing incredibly well in South Carolina, for instance, doing very well throughout the South. I mean, in Texas with African Americans, in California with African Americans, that the residual effects from not just the Obama presidency but the Obama campaigns just benefits Biden in this instance.
For sure, yeah. And so I think that for Sanders to be able to counteract that would require, not kind of any kind of shift in his big, broad messaging or the cultivation of his national persona, but can he make the kind of inroads in those neighborhoods, right, that were kind of silently but steadily really critical to building up that coalition? Because the point you made is an important one. If Biden hasn't actually continued that work, then the potential reverberating kickback he's getting in this primary can certainly have a, shelf life. And so I imagine those folks weren't necessarily tapped into by the Clinton coalition, right? One of the many factors that shaped the turnout figures that we saw. And so if there could be a concerted effort by Sanders' ground team to go into those same neighborhoods and say, hey, you were hit up, 8, 12 years ago, not really much sense. We're here, right? How can we learn from you? How can we draw on your vote? I really think that could be critical in a way that we wouldn't necessarily see because of national discourse. But one thing to really keep in mind is, how attuned are Black people, how influenced, I should say, are Black people to some of the national discourses characterizing these candidates versus the kinds of more intimate communications they're receiving from civic and community religious leaders, right? And from the kind of direct or indirect feedback they get about these candidates based on the impressions formed within those local spaces. And so I think it's those local spaces that are critical. If the national discourse mattered as much, then the whole national narrative about Biden being done after New Hampshire probably would have mattered more for Black votes in these subsequent elections. So clearly we have to recognize that disconnect and see the constraints on trying to appeal to African Americans through the kind of national discourse, but also the opportunity to be able to subside that and do better than people might expect you to do because of that face-to-face contact you've been able to cultivate.
How durable do you think this gap that you see in terms of the youth is? In other words, 29 years and younger African Americans seem to respond to the sense of like you're getting screwed over and have the same expectations that they shouldn't as the white voters who, at least in terms of like on the Democratic side. How durable is that? I mean, if the theory is that these are people who grew up with the Obama presidency, and so their expectations might be higher, their expectations might have been elevated. Part of it also, I think, is, that people under the age of 30 are getting a raw deal relative to people who were, over the age of 40, let's say, or 45. And that's a material difference. Relative to, and maybe that raw deal is less, is sort of evened out the playing field in some way, and is a great equalizer. And I think to a certain extent too, we have this dynamic of, the boomers' sensibility is, more prevalent, or I should say is more prevalent to people, of 30 and above, than it is for people who are 30 and below. How durable do you think it is, what we're seeing with these? Is this just going to be a cohort that goes through the system and they're going to be, sort of more open to, anger appeals? Or is this like the new norm? As those people get older, the younger people will also continue to sort of like follow that trajectory?
Yeah, it's a really important question, one I'm still wrestling with. One thing that's important for me to note is that, across this young cohort of Black folks that really aren't expressing anger any differently than white folks, at least in my set of data from 2016, even that anger that they express is more likely to translate to actions that kind of challenge the system rather than actions that work within the system. So I think that's the challenge for political campaigns looking to tap into that young anger, or that anger amongst young Black folks, that they're more likely to go onto a site of protest or a demonstration than a voting booth, right? So how do you translate that kind of elevated sense of expectation of what's possible from government and that willingness to get indignant about politics into electoral action? But in terms of whether that's durable, right, or whether they'll kind of ultimately develop this sense of resignation with electoral politics and kind of look no different from other Black age cohorts, I think there's a lot of dynamism there. And I think the kind of battle for the soul of the Democratic Party can really inform what we see from this emerging generation of Black folks. They certainly have more skepticism, I'd say, about the Democratic establishment than other cohorts. I think you saw that in 2016 with the real scrutiny of Clinton's record. during the 90s Clinton era from younger black folks. You're seeing that with younger black folks, at least in the online spaces that I'm privy to, very much scrutinizing Biden's record and on the crime bill in the mid 90s. They're saying, we don't have the luxury of saying, oh, it's a different time and we'll look away, right? We're still dealing with the reverberating consequences of these actions that these people took, these actions that were clearly harmful to us then, continue to be harmful to us now. We're not going to give anyone a free pass, right? So I definitely think that's where the appeal of someone that's more of an outsider like Sanders comes in. The question is, right, where's the Democratic Party going to pivot? The Republican Party had this kind of, revolution in the form of the Tea Party. And despite some initial resistance, the Republican Party kind of establishment largely fell in line, right? And we kind of saw the Republican Party now move closer to this kind of farther to the right heart of the base. The Democratic Party has its own version of that revolution in the form of the Justice Democrats, right? The Sanders Revolution. And I see a lot more resistance from the Democratic leadership machinery to kind of responding to and absorbing that, kind of moving closer to the left, the true preference point of its base. I think black, young, emergent Democrats are going to be particularly attuned to the resistance of the Democratic machinery, and if that machinery continues to resist and not just kind of adapt and move closer to the left, I think it has real meaningful consequences for black people's willingness to be kind of consistent, loyal voters to the Democratic Party. You think about vote capture, right? Black people generally across the board don't really have two options, right? The Democratic Party is typically going to be the lesser of two evils, but there's always the choice to simply not vote. And I think that's what's kind of at stake here, particularly for young black folks, but certainly not just young black folks. The Democratic base is going to be increasingly racially diverse and increasingly younger, right? So you've got a lot of people that are on the fence in terms of will they be consistent supporters, which is necessary for the Democratic Party to continue to be viable. And if they're reading that struggle for the heart of the party as, again, this machinery that's set up to just not be responsive to our preference points, then they're not going to have that same loyalty of the past generation. That's going to have, immense consequences. So I think for black people in particular of this age cohort, certainly I'm thinking about whether that resignation will set in or if it looks like for this generation more like a sense of fatigue, right, over time. Like, we're really not getting the traction we would have liked, so we're going to continue to think about alternate ways of engaging in politics. But I think the consequences are kind of just as clear and apparent for the Democratic Party because you just look at the basic demographics of the country, right? If they don't have the loyal support of this emergent generation that's going to be, much more progressive on social and economic issues, then how can they continue to win?
Good question. We're about to sort of, we'll have a little bit of an experiment with that, quite possibly with that very question over the next 6 to 9 months. We'll see. The book is The Anger Gap: How Race Shapes Emotion in Politics. We'll put a link to this at majority.fm. Davin L. Phoenix, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate the chance to talk with you.
Bye-bye. There you have it.
It's interesting to think about the impact of progress on young people, because I often think of the most immiserated people being the most angry, and millennials are angry because we're getting screwed worse than our parents' generation. But the idea that, seeing some progress in the form of Obama or what have you has inspired people to ask for more is also interesting.
That's actually, from what I remember in my college days of studying about revolutions, that's actually where they happen. Like when there is a little bit of benefit given to the people, when there's a little bit of loosening of the grip, or when there's one thing, getting one thing begets the desire for more things.
especially when they try to take things away from you.
Well, but if I remember correctly, it's not so much the taking away after they've got it. It's actually getting more and just being like, hey, wait a second. Like, it's almost as if folks don't have the ability to imagine what certain benefits are like. And when they get a taste of it, you start to realize, like, hey, wait a second. This is possible. We've been denied it for a long time, but it is possible. And we want more. Like, that dynamic is actually, my understanding, at least I was in college a long time ago. But that was the sort of like current sort of social science on revolutions, that they happen when you loosen or when you give a taste of like other benefits.
Another thing to think about is, just plug my literary hangover now, the Salem Witch Trials episode. So the Salem Witch Trials were in the 1690s, the Great Awakening, the sort of evangelical awakening, in the 1730s. Both of those things started very similarly with basically aberrant behavior by young people. And what determines whether it's going to be a witch hunt or a great awakening is basically how the elders interpret it. Is it something that needs to be exorcised, or is it something that needs to be sort of exorcised, like exorcism of Emily Rose, or is it something that needs to be sort of like captured by the church and used to regenerate it? And it looks like we're going with the witch hunt model.
What determines that, though?
What determines that specifically?
The response. Like, is it just that, like, we have to go with it, we have no chance, or that we do have the ability to repress it?
At least in that specific case, it might be because there was a living memory of witch hunts, and we can't go down that route, so we're going to have to figure out another way to handle this, possibly. I'm not sure exactly what the difference is, but that is at least the difference. The different
responses.
The key decider is the adult's interpretation of it.
Well, the adults are not responding so great right now, as far as I can tell. And well, we'll talk more about this over the next couple of days, right? Because we are at an inflection point, I think, in terms of the Democratic primary race. And it's possible that we've already passed the inflection point, but we don't know it yet. But we will certainly get a sense of things tomorrow night. And we're going to do some live coverage of the primaries tomorrow night. The biggest ones from the perspective of, there's only two candidates left in the race, essentially. I think Tulsi Gabbard is still technically in the race, but I mean, I don't know that anybody would argue that she's viable at this point. We're going to see. I mean, Bernie Sanders needs to win Michigan, and he needs to win Washington State. And the polling doesn't look so great now. I can tell you that the polling, I don't know if it was the day before going into Michigan in 2016, looked awfully similar. And Sanders eked it out by, I think, 1.5 points. If Sanders wins Michigan and Washington, regardless of the margin, you want it to, I think, you want him to win big, obviously, but if it just ekes it out, then I think, going into the debate on Sunday, although it's been sort of converted into a more of like a fireside chat nap type of situation, because I think the DNC realizes, and this is, highly problematic, when you feel like you have to make your debate sort of like a little bit more comfy for one of the people there because you're a little bit concerned that they can't make through it. Understand you don't necessarily have the same latitude when it comes to debating the Republican. But I mean,
they don't care.
I don't know if they've if it's been locked in, and I imagine, and I don't know when it will be. Maybe he's waiting to roll this out for his speech, or maybe he's waiting till after tomorrow to roll it out, which I imagine he is. But Trump's going to come out and he's going to mock Joe Biden for this. They had to have Sleepy Joe sit down. Now, I don't think that the mocking of Biden in this way is really actually going to have an impact. The mocking itself in the context of the election. I just don't think that is going to do it. I do think that if Biden is the nominee. I think the reality of it will have more of a, but like, in other words, his limited ability to, go to 5 states in a day and campaign in 5 places in a day, 4 places in a day, 3 places in a day, 2 in a week. I mean, who knows? Could have implications, but we'll see. There's so many factors right now, and it's too early to say that Sanders is out of it. We got to wait until tomorrow, I think, to really make an assessment. Things have really turned. I said on Friday, I thought that, Warren's endorsement was really important as an intervening event that could change the trajectory of the race. I said this actually Tuesday night at 3 a.m. on MSNBC. Changed the trajectory of the race in such a way that Sanders gets a boost in Michigan and Washington. It's not guaranteed that would have happened, but I think it was an important element. And then we get to the debates. But even as we get into the general election, and I don't know if the polling on this impacts people. I have not perceived this as like sort of some type of conventional wisdom, but it appears the things that the Democratic nominee will face in dealing with Donald Trump are very different looking today than they were 6 weeks ago. Because of coronavirus, because of the actual impact it's going to have from a health standpoint, the anxiety it creates amongst people, and from an economic perspective, the idea of a recession happening appears to be, a legitimate possibility with a combination of the coronavirus and what's happening with oil prices, apparently. So who knows? There's a lot of things to talk about. We will be talking about them in the fun half today. We'll be talking about them tomorrow. Nomi Kantz is going to stop by for our coverage tomorrow night. Tomorrow we'll be talking more about this stuff. And so stick with us, and we shall see. We're going to take a quick break in a second. Also, remind you that your support makes the show possible. You can support this program by going to jointhemajority.report.com. We will be here every day giving you analysis of things, some news updates, interviews like the one we had today on the anger gap, a fascinating perspective on this stuff that, frankly, I don't feel like I've been made aware of that type of dynamic. I don't know that I've read anything like that before. About how, the closest thing I've come from it is like, I remember coming in and talking to Michael, used to work downstairs. Do you remember Mike? And after Trump won, and going like, man, can't believe it. He goes, I can effing believe it.
Phil of Two Dope Boys was the exact same way.
Yeah, this country is effing
Black people were
racist.
unsurprised by Trump.
Unsurprised. And I mean, that was like a sort of a little bit of a hint about that. So you can support the show by becoming a member at jointhemajority.report.com. We bring you all of these different perspectives. We try to every day. You can get the free show, free of commercials, and then you get the fun half. And then, you get like little bonuses every now and then. Like we post a video of we did with this, and we're going to be doing more of that as time goes on and I get a little more sleep. I'm dizzy. I'm still dizzy. Also, speaking of Nomiki Kantz, check out the Nomiki Show, as it were, on patreon.com and on YouTube. Also, check out the AM Quickie, available every morning by 8 a.m., 6-7 minutes. cranking it out. People are loving it. You can listen on our app at majorityapp.com, or you can just sign up a podcast completely free. amquickie.com, or you can find it on any of your podcast subscription platforms, whatever you call that. And justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority. TMBS will not be on Tuesday night this week. It'll be on Wednesday night this week, and it will feature Matt.
Ooh, I think Liz Franzik, and I'm not sure. I can't remember who the other guest is.
So there you have that. Check that out. The Michael Brooks Show on YouTube. And Jamie, the Antifada.
Oh, yes. So this week on the Antifada, I spoke with some organizers from the wildcat strike that's going on at UC Santa Cruz right now about their goals, how they got to this point, what it means for labor organizing at large and education in this country, and how excited they were when Bernie tweeted in support of the strike. That's coming out on Wednesday. Also, still recommend our main app and our bonus app from last week, wherein we speak with Shuja Haider about the Bernie Sanders movement and what it means to the larger fight for socialism. Patreon.com/theantifada.
That's what Saul says to me when he wants to watch TV. Can I watch an app? It's just not something that we said as kids. Like we never said like an episode.
Well, yeah, because you couldn't enjoy things in episode contents back in the day. Really,
you couldn't like you had no option.
Yeah,
like
it has to be on the TV.
Right, like the fact that it's episode. Like there was no podcast.
Yeah.
You know, like episode, it was such a formal word. It wasn't like a unit of ingestion.
No,
as it
it's
were.
just like, can I watch TV now?
I remember when I first downloaded X-Files episodes onto my hard drive, and it felt like the most high-tech thing ever.
And probably illicit.
It was, yeah. Anyway, Literary Hangover this Saturday, Widow Ranter by Afra Ben. It's a play, but from about like the end of the 17th century about Bacon's Rebellion. Not very historically accurate, but we are going to talk about race and gender in colonial Virginia, and how, for instance, white women were tax exempt because they were sort of like wives of their that economic productivity went to their husbands, but black women had to pay taxes on their wealth to the state of Virginia. So there you go, or the Commonwealth, or whatever it is.
All right, folks.
The other thing she...
What is that? I don't know where that's coming from. There you go.
Too many taps.
Yeah, there you go. What are you doing? You can't figure out where you...
I got all the tabs open for the sound.
Oh, folks. Anyways, here we go. Oh, yeah!
Return of my band this week, Thursday, in Greenpoint, which is in North Brooklyn, at a venue called the Kingsland.
Why are you doing it way up there, dude?
I was in... Well, there aren't any venues left in Park Slope, Sam, in case you were wondering.
I don't know where. I don't know. You
Yeah.
go Fort Greene.
There's nothing down here anymore. But
Gowanus.
We're playing with some bands from Jersey, from Asbury Park, where I briefly lived when I was working on a previous media project. And we're going to be on opening at 8 o'clock. And you can come see us, $10 advance, $13 day of show.
That's a deal.
You guys should cover that Joe Hill Pie in the Sky song, Brendan, I think.
Oh, yeah. Totally.
All right. See you in the fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's a good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 times. 847-906-501-457-238-56-27. 1 half. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
yeah, I don't think Tuesday night should be too late. I mean, Washington State's going to come in late, but the big issue is going to be Michigan.
Oh boy.
Oh boy is right. Oh boy. So, I mean, let's talk about some more pleasant stuff like COVID-19. Let's go through some of this stuff. I mean, this is a real concern. And like I say, I think Bernie is holding a roundtable in Detroit today or tomorrow about response to COVID-19. And to a certain extent, I wish they had done this earlier. I wish that he had embraced this during the last debate. I think it would have been helpful for all the Democratic candidates to do that, more broadly speaking. But I think there is a narrative, at least, that I don't know. I mean, if Donald Trump actually tried to create this narrative, I don't know how he could do a better job, frankly, than to create a narrative that he just hoped this thing would go away, and that the key would be to sort of downplay it politically. And here is where he basically gives up the ghost. Do we have the one where he doesn't want people to come off the boat because he doesn't want to double the number? Was that in that thread? Well, first let's go to this. Here's Ben Carson. This is number 4. Here's Ben Carson on ABC This Week saying that there's no plan to dock the Grand Princess. This is a massive cruise liner off the West Coast that there are reported cases of COVID-19 on the boat. Donald Trump said just a day or two ago when he was at the CDC that they don't necessarily want to bring them in because then there'd be more cases. Now, of course, he said this 2 or 3 days ago where he was remember 5 days ago, he was like, there's only 12 cases and we're done. And of course, now we're up at, we're up at 500 as of yesterday. That number, I will bet you tomorrow will be closer to 1,000 because of the way this thing is growing. Here is Ben Carson sort of giving away a little bit of the ghost on this Grand Princess thing that, well, listen to this.
As you know, the Grand Princess is docking, the cruise ship is docking in Oakland tomorrow. What plan is in place to deal with the 3,500 people on board?
The cruise ship personnel, and as you know, the Vice President met with the CEOs of the major cruise ship companies yesterday. And they are coming up with a plan within 72 hours of that meeting.
The ship's docking tomorrow.
The plan will be in place by that time, but I don't want to preview the plan right now.
Pause it for 1 second. First off, you should know there's a secret plan. This is the classic. There's a secret plan. A little bit of math. They met tomorrow. They met yesterday, right? Let's say they met more or less at the same time as this interview took place. How many hours is that? How many hours ago was that? Yeah, 24 hours. Correct. Thank you, guys. This is like a math class. 24 hours ago, and they're coming up with a plan in 72 hours. So if the ship docks tomorrow, that's 48 hours because he said this yesterday.
Well, if he says what the plan is, then the coronavirus is going to know what's coming. It's a matter of national security.
But my point is that Carson says we're going to have the plan in 48 hours from today, even though the ship docks in 24 hours. Does anybody else see a problem with that? Maybe they're just going to sit in the harbor on the boat and not allow these people off the boat. As presumably, right, there are people on this boat who have it, who might need medical attention that you can't get on a cruise liner. There is no plan, and the reason why there is no plan is because Trump was telling his people, I don't want that boat to dock because then the numbers of cases will go up, and that's not fair. This is the way his mind thinks. I don't want to get blamed for those. So can't we just leave it at sea? And so when Trump says this to his administration, that's why they don't come up with a plan, because they're like, we're not sure if we're even allowed to bring it up. And nobody in the administration is like, well, maybe we should just have a contingency plan just in case he changes his mind. How do we know Trump didn't want this boat to dock? Well, here he is. When was this? 2 days ago at the CDC? Friday at the CDC.
It's a very good question. From my standpoint, I want to rely on people. I have great experts, including our vice president, who's working 24 hours a day on this stuff. They would like to have the people come off. I'd rather have the people stay, but I'd go with them. I told them to make the final decision. I would rather, because I like the numbers being where they are. I don't need to have the numbers double because of one ship. That wasn't our fault. And it wasn't the fault of the people on the ship either. Okay? It wasn't their fault either.
Look, this guy's mind, the way this guy's mind works when faced with a pandemic is stunning. I told them I would rather have the ship not offload. Now, maybe the people will get, the people around me saying they're going to die. Like, you can't leave them out there. Maybe but here's why I don't want it, because it's not our fault that they're sick. Now, I'm not saying it's their fault. It's not the people's fault. But it's not our fault, so we shouldn't have to deal with the extra numbers. Like it's like a fairness thing to him. Like, I don't want to get blamed for the extra numbers. I've been trying to keep the numbers low.
We bring them ashore when we have about 1,000 cases, and that way the numbers don't double it. They're just a smaller fraction on top.
Exactly. Or how about this? we let them get off the boat in Vancouver, then it's Canada's fault. Like, look at the Canada numbers. Why can't we do that? Why can't we do Vancouver? It's close to Oakland. We could go up there. We'll pay them money to take the ship and put it in Vancouver.
And if the ship happens to mysteriously sink in the night, I'm sure the Trump White House had nothing to do with it.
Not our fault.
Not anybody's fault.
Not
But
anybody's
the numbers
fault.
are good.
The numbers are good. In fact, because those were numbers that we almost had, we should almost subtract extra numbers. Like, in other words, it's going down now.
Yeah, add those numbers and then we'll take them down because of the sinking.
If this stuff is not like Mike Bloomberg spending money registering black voters, I read $2 million or something like that on his way out, good for him. Good job. With all that money that they're planning to put into like these never Trumper ads, this should be the ads. These should be the ads. These are the ads. Because this thing is going to, at the very least, disrupt all our lives. And the idea that he slowed, that is indicative of all the slowing that Donald Trump has done in terms of our response, because he thought in his feeble mind that all I need to do is just, everything is fine. Don't worry. And it'll blow over. A lot of time, these things blow over. You know, like they think you're going to get a big hurricane or a big snowstorm, and then all of a sudden it doesn't show up. So instead of like mobilizing the trucks to put the sand on the road and all this, we're just going to chill. And that way it'll go away.
You know, we spend so much time talking about how the political establishment is bad and Trump is just mostly a normal Republican, but this is one instance that reminds us that he is uniquely incompetent.
This is a sheer competence test, and this is what he does poorly. Like this is
he doesn't even try it.
I mean, this is the test. And here is a clip. Trump Friday at the CDC. He is on one side of him is Adam Azar, is it? He is the Health and Human Services head. He is an incredible lackey for Donald Trump. The other guy next to him is this guy, Redfield. And he was part of, in addition to like him like wanting like an enormous salary when he came in, it was Alex Azar, sorry. When he wanted to come in, this guy's history of working in health, he worked at the Institute of Human Virology, which was an HIV/AIDS program led by Robert Gallo, former NHS researcher. Redfield managed the Institute's clinical care program with HIV. His early engagement with the AIDS epidemic in the U.S. in the 80s and 90s was controversial, to say the least. This is from a CNN piece. As an Army major at Walter Reed Medical Institute, he designed policies for controlling the disease within the U.S. military that involved placing infected personnel in quarantine and investigating their past to identify and track possible sexual partners. Soldiers were routinely discharged and left to die of AIDS, humiliated and jobless, often abandoned by their families. In the 80s, Redfield worked closely with Shepard Smith Jr. and his Christian organization, Americans for a Sound AIDS HIV Policy, or ASAP. The group maintained that AIDS was God's judgment against homosexuals, spread in America, weakened by single-parent households and a loss of family values. He wrote the introduction to a 1990 book, Christians in the Age of AIDS, co-written by Smith, in which he denounced distribution of sterile needles to drug users and condoms to sexually active adults, and described anti-discrimination programs as the efforts of false prophets. In the 2000s, Redfield was a top advocate for the so-called ABCs of AIDS in Africa, pressing to prevent HIV infection through sexual abstinence, monogamy, and the use of condoms only as a last resort.
He's perfect.
Perfect. This is a Pence hire. I mean, you can pick them out, right? Like the vast majority of them are. And listen to this guy talk about yes men.
Doctor, do you want to make a little statement?
What's your name again, sir?
Dr. Steve Monroe.
Well, I think first I want to thank you for your decisive leadership.
Pause it. This is Redfield's, Trump accused him. Doctor, I think you have an announcement to make. Go. And here it is.
Well, I think first I want to thank you for your decisive leadership in helping us, put public health first. I also want to thank you for coming here today and sort of encouraging and bringing energy to the men and women that you see that work every day to try to keep America safe. So I think that's the most important thing I want to say.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And the whole situation is, the testing has been amazing, actually, what they've been able to produce in such a short period of time. You had mentioned 4 million tests.
Yeah. You'd mentioned 4 million tests as just a number that you threw out there that has no bearing to how many tests we produced or we're going to be able to produce. Can you imagine this? Head of the CDC, you have something to say to the press here? You're head of the CDC. Yes, I do have something to say in this time of potential national crisis and oncoming pandemic. I just want to say, Mr. President, you have done an amazing job. That's it. That's all I have to say. Mr. President, you're amazing. Really. And the idea that you're here, you're raising everybody's spirits. Because now they know that you're here.
Nailed it.
Good job. Good job, Brownie.
Robert Redford, I love that guy.
Yeah, he's really good. It doesn't look... no, but you look like a doctor. And that works for me. So, that's all good. This is clip number what? Clip number 8. Understand the dynamic of what happened here. The CDC could have adopted the World Health Organization tests. In South Korea, where now they've had 4 days in a row of diminished cases being found. In other words, they had multiple weeks of testing 10,000 people per day with nasal swabs at drive-thrus. Like, they were able to sort of isolate who has it, who doesn't. You're quarantined. We've stopped the roll of it. And now, I mean, you look at what's happening in New York, right? Like, now, I don't know, 150 people up in Westchester, cluster around something. They got people on the west side. I mean, it's happening. You're starting to see it pop up everywhere now. And because nobody could get tests, nobody's getting tested. Nobody's getting tested. Relatively speaking, there is no concerted effort, no broad plan to test. And so the CDC, when they first rolled out their test, localities were realizing, like, this test's not working. It's a bad test. Why don't you just adopt the World Health Organization test? Now, I don't know the reason why they didn't do this. I don't know that they've publicly said why, because they keep getting asked this question. My guess is we're going to find out at one point. Trump had a donor that was like, we can make the test, right? Like, it's a money play. And, but here is the CDC people being asked, like, why don't you just adopt the World Health Organization test? Like, people are producing that test.
Testing with just the 2 signatures. And this is something that could easily happen where we're just, again, starting from scratch with sequence information, building a test rather rapidly. We did small-scale testing here before rolling it out because our goal was to get it out to the public health labs as quickly as possible.
But you didn't have to start from scratch. You could have just used the WHO's test. Why did you choose to start from scratch when it's a longer process?
Pause it. Now, listen.
With
pause it. See, she's asking, well, why did you start from scratch? Why did you start from scratch, do limited testing, send it out, find out that it's bad? Why didn't you just start with the WHO test, the World Health Organization test? And here's his response.
Scratch. You could have just used the WHO's test. Why did you choose to start from scratch when it's a longer process?
But we started with our test probably at the same time the Germans and the other Italians and the other groups that have worked with WHO were on developing their test. Nobody could start with test development until the sequence information was made available by the Chinese.
Right, but theirs didn't have any faults.
I'd like to make one thing clear.
Please.
When this test was developed in really very rapid time, it was first offered here at CDC. So all the public health labs of this nation could use CDC as we do when any new disease comes, and we can help them understand if this new pathogen is in that individual. That was available as soon as our test was approved by the FDA. Not a faulty test, a very accurate test. But the challenge was you had to send the sample here to CDC. That's the same test we use today. So no state lab never had no access. They always had the ability to send it here.
But they had to send it here because there were false reads.
No, they had to send it here because that's how we started it. Then we developed the test to expand, and in the manufacturing, there was, then after that, we sent it out to the states to see if they could verify that it worked. We found that in some of the states it didn't work. We figured out why. I don't consider that a fault. I consider that doing quality control. I consider that success, making sure this test was going to perform out there with the same proficiency that it performed here.
He stopped himself because the sequencing of what he was saying was wrong. They sent the test out to the states. It didn't work, and that's a success. We found that we failed, and every entrepreneur will tell you, if you don't have 5 failures, you need 5 failures for every success. Now, of course, there is a successful test that was already being deployed. For whatever reason, our test took longer to deploy and to find out was wrong. And then once you found out that was wrong, why did you have to go back and fix it? Why didn't you just adopt the WHO test? And I am quite convinced it is because the manufacturer, like there was some deal where like, well, we're going to want the patent so that we can basically give one of our manufacturers the ability to create this test and make some money. I mean, this is just my own speculation, but there has to be, you know, it wasn't just American pride. We didn't want any of that German test.
We don't want to copy their homework.
Oh my God. We're not like that.
We're doing extra credit on our own.
We want to do it. Not have like sauerkraut on it or whatever it is.
I guess we're getting a public option for something.
Yeah, there we go.
New York has introduced its own hand sanitizer, actually, speaking of public options for things made by prison labor. So good job, Cuomo.
Well,
God. I was just about excited about that.
Well, maybe that means that they'll at least get some hand sanitizer in the prisons. Because I heard a story about like they were, I think it was at Rikers, were just like, please send some hand sanitizer. We don't have any here.
Oh, yeah.
There's no soap.
It is also part of the public plan to use prison labor to bury the dead from coronavirus. Are we just saying it now? The C word?
COVID-19. Did I say it?
Yeah, you've been saying it.
Well, whatever. We got a plan. Oh, we'll take care of that. We'll take care of that afterwards. Here's Ben Carson. Here's how Ben Carson was sent out to explain that away the idea that we refused to use the World Health Organization test, that we created our own test. It was a failure in the test, had to be sent back to the CDC. They're trying to reformulate the test, and then they are manufacturing the test, and that's why we don't have enough tests for everybody. We refuse to use the WHO test, which has already been in production. They've been doing 10,000 in South Korea. We couldn't use their test. That's South Koreans. I don't know if it works the same way.
Made in USA, baby.
And here's Dr. Ben Carson explaining what's all the obsession about the test.
Response to Governor Cuomo, and what kind of assurances can you provide the tests are on the way?
Well, over 1 million tests were shipped out already this past week. Tomorrow, another 640,000 will be available. And those are only the ones that are being dealt with on a federal official level. There are also tests being created by the veterans hospitals and most of the academic centers have them. So there are a lot of tests, but the key thing is everybody doesn't need a test. And that should be something that should be determined by the medical professionals who are administering the test.
Yeah, that's the argument. Now, the million have been shipped out, but unfortunately, they've been shipped by Pony Express. They're doing, this is going to be like a Balto situation where they do like a little mini Iditarods, and the lack of snow is slowing everything down.
We're pretty sure those ones aren't faulty, but we'll hear about that in a week if they are.
Right. Not everybody needs a test, but when you have here's the problem. You got, just to use Westchester, right? This outbreak in Westchester. The guy apparently worked in New York City. And so he comes down in New York City and you can't even test all the people who had contact with him. So you don't know if the people who had contact with him contracted it. And then you don't know because you're going to wait. By the time you wait the 14 days to find out if anybody got it, then the number of people who have been in contact with all those people it's exponentially growing. You need tests. You need mass testing in order to slow this thing down. It's just stunning. And on that same day, Mike Pence is out there saying we don't have enough tests for today. But Ben Carson is saying, well, not everybody needs a test. Meanwhile, just to sort of here's the Surgeon General on the same day, right? Talking to Jake Tapper about the test. Ben Carson, he is a more practiced liar than Jerome Adams. Now, Adams, do we have the clip of him later in this? Yeah, okay. We'll get to the next clip. So Adams, he has a harder time, and to his credit, lying about the tests than he does about other things. We will get to that. But here is Jerome Adams, our Surgeon General. This is after Ben Carson said, there's no problem with the test. We got the test. It's just not everybody needs a test.
Can you tell us how many people have been tested in the United States?
The numbers are tough because they're changing minute by minute, but here's what people should know.
Give us a rough estimate?
Well, but here's what people should know about the testing. They should know that we have 75,000 tests available right now for folks. By early next week, tomorrow, we should have over 2 million tests available. By the end of the week, through partnerships with private industry, over 4 million tests available. But the most important number to the American people is 1. They want to know, if I go in, can I get a test? And the one thing that I've heard, I've been to Georgia, I've been to Florida, I've been to Connecticut in the past week, is that no public health doctor who has asked for a test has not been able to get a test. So people should talk to their healthcare providers. We've been telling folks, if you and your healthcare provider talk, and
that's just not true. We just keep hearing stories of people saying that there is no test. Now, he's saying no public health doctor. Maybe all of this stops before it gets to a public health doctor, where basically, you're not, according to CDC rules, you're not eligible for a test because you're not showing symptoms. But continue here.
We've been telling folks, if you and your healthcare provider talk and your healthcare provider thinks you need a test, then you will get a test, and we're rapidly ramping up capacity.
You can't give me just a yes or no. You can't give me even a rough number of how many Americans have been tested. You don't know.
I would refer you to the CDC for that because, again, the numbers change so rapidly. I don't want to give you a number.
They took it off the website, how many people have been tested. They removed it from the website.
Well, actually, I would direct you to the transcript from the conversation that FDA Commissioner Steve Hahn had yesterday, where he gave very specific numbers. Important thing for the American people to know, again, is talk to your healthcare provider. If your healthcare provider thinks you need a test, there's been no indication I've gotten from around the country that folks can't get it.
The FDA commissioner gave a number that was in the 5,000s, but it was how many tests have been given, not how many people have been tested. We're still waiting for a number on that.
And expect millions more with the capability to be tested by the end of this week.
Millions more, but the capability at the end of this week. All right, doctor, thank you so much. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Facts over fear, Jake.
I agree.
Oh, my God. Facts over fear, says Surgeon General Jerome Adams, as he is basically saying, I cannot give you a number of how many people have been tested. That test number is moving too quickly. So I would suggest you look at the transcript from yesterday by the FDA, which apparently he knew, So the number of tested in this country is less than 5,000 people. And how many cases do we already have confirmed? Right? Like, we have confirmed, what, like 2,000 now?
In the U.S.?
In the U.S.?
There are more than 500.
Maybe close to 1,000, maybe 1,200 at this point of confirmed cases, but we don't even know. There are only 5,000 tests that have been out there available. That means that unlikely that there's been 5,000 actual tests.
Yeah, facts and fear are not mutually exclusive in this case.
That's right. In fact, I think there was a lot more reason for fear than believing that we're getting facts from the good doctor. However, if you are concerned about the facts that you're getting from the U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Jerome Adams, and you want some confidence in his presenting only the facts, going on television, he's on State of the Union with Jake Tapper. He's only presenting the facts. So you don't have to have fear, Jake, about the testing thing. Facts are more important. And we're gonna have millions of tests by the end of the week. Trust me. In fact, Jerome Adams says, I'm going to exhibit why you should trust me as I describe the health of the President of the United States. I don't know if anybody's seen a picture of him lately, but according to the U.S. Surgeon General, well, don't judge a book by its cover.
If people are going to go out there, we want them to be extra cautious. We want them to wash their hands frequently. And I was with the president on Friday, and I just said, sir, when's the last time you've washed your hands? And he said, I washed my hands just a few minutes ago. We want to make sure if folks are out there who are at risk, they're taking extra precautions. But speaking of being at risk, the president, he sleeps less than I do, and he's healthier than what I am. And so that's the other reason that this messaging is hard, because there are 70-year-olds who run marathons and are healthier than some 30-year-olds. It's really focusing on the comorbidities, on the medical problems, heart disease, lung disease, immunocompromised folks, in addition to that combination of older age that seems to put people most at risk.
Is Donald Trump running marathons?
I hope so. I don't think so, though.
No, he needs to conserve his energy.
I mean, can you imagine now that they're saying, like, it's very hard to say this because there are some 70-year-olds who are more healthy than a 30-year-old. Well, yes, that's true. But I mean, we're dealing with the entire country now. And so broadly speaking, from an actuarial standpoint, 70-year-olds, not as healthy as 30-year-olds, any more than Donald Trump is more healthy than Jerome Adams. I'm sorry. Does anybody want to place a bet on who's going to be here in 25 years?
I'd like to see Jerome and Trump race.
That would be great to see, like... Jerome, I just wanted you to know I'm going out training for my 5K. I just want to take it easy this week, so I'm going to go out. Maybe I'll do 10K. It's shocking. Here, let's play one more clip of Ben Carson. In Italy now, and there's a trajectory. Do we have the trajectory, that graphic from Italy? This gives you a sense of how rapidly the number of cases in Italy have grown. And in February 8th, they had 3 cases. February 18th, they had 3 cases. By February 21st, they had 20 cases. By February 24th, they had 231 cases. By February 25th, it was somewhere between 231 and 655, because the 27th, they had 655. That is, on March 7th, that's where the U.S. was, okay? Equivalent to February 25th in Italy. By March 7th, they had gone 11 days, I guess that's 11 days, they had almost 6,000 cases. So 8 days later, the Italian government, from where we were yesterday, shut down all schools. 8 days later. And then 3 days after that, so 11 days later, from where we were yesterday, relative to Italy, they quarantined like a quarter of their population in Italy, northern Italy. That's how drastic the steps that they took. Here is Ben Carson. Now, just want to tell you, Ben Carson was a neurosurgeon. He's a brain surgeon. Now, how many brains do you operate on at one time, Matt?
One, I think.
That's correct. Now, you're not a brain surgeon.
No.
But it seems like you're at least on your way. In other words, the concept of operating on a brain and the concept of public health are not necessarily the same thing. He is not a public health expert any more than he is or was a public housing expert. But they send him on there because he's a doctor and we need some type of like seeming legitimacy. With all that information about Italy you just saw, here's his response as to what we need in terms of like a plan to deal with communities, essentially community infection, which basically means the infections are no longer coming from outside the community, they're coming from within the community.
That some governments and communities are taking broader measures right now. We just announced overnight Italy is on lockdown in the north. Major conferences like South by Southwest have been canceled here in the United States. Companies like Facebook and Twitter are urging employees to work from home if they can. Is it time for more extensive community-wide measures to contain this virus?
I think it's time for people to really indulge themselves and learning about how viruses are spread, and to take advantage of that knowledge in determining what their daily activities are going to be. And as I said before, it's very important to emphasize that there's certain groups of people who are at much higher risk than the general population, and they need to take extra consideration in terms of where they're going to be, how they're going to mingle with the society.
And sir, I get that, and we all need to take responsibility for ourselves. But I'm asking you, as a representative of the president, as a member of the coronavirus task force, what should the community be doing? Is it time for more extensive measures? We've heard the president say, for example, that he's going to continue with political rallies in the face of this. Is this sending the right message, or is it time for broader community measures to contain this?
Again, going to a rally, if you're a healthy individual and you're taking the precautions that have been placed out there, there's no reason that you shouldn't go. However, if you belong to one of those categories of high risk, obviously you need to think twice about that.
I'm confused by the message you're sending right now, Dr. Carson. I have to say, we just heard yesterday the governor of California say it's not a question of when schools are going to close. I mean, if schools are going to close, but when schools are going to close. We've seen companies taking responsibility for their employees and saying, let's not have any unnecessary travel. You seem to be putting all the responsibility back on individuals, saying that they should be thinking for themselves. I'm trying to ask you what, in the view of the government experts right now, what broader measures need to be taken?
Those recommendations will be coming out from the CDC. They're being evaluated on a daily basis. Right now, the recommendation is as I just prescribed. Go about your normal daily activities if you are healthy. If you are not healthy, think very seriously about attending places where there are crowds.
Dr. Carson, thanks for your time this morning.
All right, folks. Now, I'm no brain surgeon, but I want you to contemplate this. Let's just say hypothetically, my dad or my mom is unhealthy, so they're going to stay at home. and I'm going to go to a rally, and I'm going to see all these people there, and I don't have to worry about it because I'm healthy. And I contract the coronavirus, and I come home, and I hug my mom and dad. Hi, I'm home. Don't worry about a thing. You didn't go to the rally. You're perfectly safe. And 14 days later, I start to have a cough. And then 15 days later, my dad does, or my mom does. I mean, this is just stunning. And I like the fact he's like, if you have one of the prescribed illnesses, what are the reasons why you shouldn't go? Don't go. And take all the precautions that we've talked about. Every one of you out there should be working as an individual on your own test and maybe vaccine. Look, is it not in your own self-interest to do this? If we all just pursued our own self-interest here, ladies and gentlemen, by going out and creating a test or creating a vaccine, or for that matter, a cure, we would be fine. But there are too many people in this society who are just takers. They're not makers. They're sitting around going, you come up with a vaccine. You come up with a test. And I'm just going to use it. That's the problem we have. People are not taking personal responsibility. They are not following their own self-interests.
Yeah, and if you get the coronavirus, it's probably your own fault.
I mean, who are you going to blame? Why are you always blaming somebody else? Why are we letting the public health safety net become a hammock for everybody?
I've been staying up till 3 a.m. learning how to model viral spreads on programs on computer just so I can make sure I'm safe.
There you go. There you go. And where are we? Like when you come into work, like what is this? Are you at DEF CON like what, 3?
I don't know. I don't quite trust my data yet, but I think we're in trouble.
I do too. Calling from a 989 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
What? No way, man. What's going on, dude?
Hey, who's this? Where you calling from?
Hey, this is Matt in Detroit. I want to say happy birthday, Jamie.
Thank you.
I've got that right at the top of my sheet here.
There you go.
You really obliterated the fourth wall with that one, Sam.
Yeah, well, that's my thing. What can I do for you?
This is all I want to say to my fellow Michiganders. Please, please, please phone bank tonight, or better yet, canvass. But if you can't canvass, please phone bank at berniesanders.com/call for all those who are new to phone banking. From one, I used to volunteer for wolf-pack.com. The best times to call were around 6 to 8:30 in that early evening window. It's the best time to reach people on the phone. So phone bank tonight, please, and then vote tomorrow. Take your family, take your friends, take your priest, take your minister or your rabbi. Just please vote, and please encourage the other people in your life to vote for Bernie, MF, and Sanders. I'll talk to you later, Sam.
All right, thanks for the call. Don't swear. Don't swear.
No, a lot of people just want someone to talk to and swear at them. It's true.
There you go. Calling from a 646 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi there. It's Lisa Boomer from the formerly middle-class Stuyvesant town. I have to say, Sam, that your speculation about wars to test in the United States is all about profit. And the other thing I wanted to briefly say is I believe that the forces behind Joe Biden are quite aware of his shortcomings, shall we say. And I kind of wonder if maybe there's going to be a bait and switch come the convention, and maybe they'll just stick in Sherrod Brown as the nominee. And I think Sherrod Brown probably can go against Trump a little better.
Why do you think Sherrod Brown?
Why Sherrod Brown? Because I believe there were folks who felt that he would have been the correct guy to run because, you know, he has all that labor support and he is considered progressive on things, even though he supported whatever the new NAFTA is called. And he, you know, he's in the Midwest, he's from Ohio, all that kind of stuff. And I've
But
heard
but you don't have any particular reason to think that it's Sherrod Brown. I mean, you're just speculating.
Correct.
Okay. I mean, all right. Well, and I appreciate the phone call. It's an interesting theory. I mean, I find it hard to believe that there is like, I don't think that Joe Biden is in on the plan, if that is the plan. I think that is, I do think that, look, there is a certain amount of gaslighting going on right now about Joe Biden, and I'm not making a clinical observation. I'm not a medical person. And I don't know the reasons why, but I have been watching politics as an interested a person since the early 90s. I have been observing politics as someone who's made my living observing politics for 15 years. I remember doing sketches about the Anita Hill hearings. I was taking photographs of my television of the Anita Hill hearings, of which Joe Biden was chairing the committee. I am familiar with the way that Joe Biden has functioned in society. I can tell you, I never heard a word about his stutter until this year. He's run for president when I was able to vote 2 times prior to this one. I also can tell you that I am on various listservs with all sorts of reporters, and many of whom are ideologically aligned or don't necessarily have a problem with Joe Biden from an ideological standpoint, who have said things to the effect of he's lost a step. I can tell you that I have had off-the-record conversations with elected Democratic officials or lawmakers who have said things like leaking oil about Joe Biden. These are not new observations. This has been since day one. Here is a
compilation from November 21st.
Yeah, this is from 6 months ago. Morning Joe's panel noticing it.
There are growing concerns among Democrats, Corinne, in terms of whether he's up for this. As Joe and I was just saying, that the pace is only going to pick up. The campaign has largely, other than these debates, kept him out of a lot of big public moments in the public eye. Yeah. What are you hearing in terms of Democrats' concerns about whether Joe Biden's simply up for the job?
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that they don't know if he is going to be. This is the folks in my circle, right? The folks who are doing this behind the scenes and wondering, can he do it if he becomes a nominee and he's up against Donald Trump.
This was his opening statement. Well, look, the next president of the United States is going to have to do 2 things. Defeat Donald Trump. That's number 1. And number 2, he's going to have to be able to go into states like Georgia and North Carolina and other places. Number 1, that Donald Trump doesn't want me to be the nominee. That's pretty clear. He held up aid to make sure that while at the same time innocent people in the Donbass are getting killed by Russian soldiers. Secondly, I found out that Vladimir Putin doesn't want me to be president.
All right, so of course, Willie, he's struggling there. He's closing his eyes. He knows he's having trouble finding words. The sentences are jumbled. The words are jumbled.
Yeah. My point being this, look, it is one thing for the Democratic Party, and look, this is voted upon by people who, most people don't have a sense of who can win in the fall. A lot of people don't spend their days watching Morning Joe. They don't watch
the debates.
There's a lot of voters out there who, when it comes time for them to vote, They take their cues from well-known party members. So when there's endorsements from 2 other, now 4 other or 5 other presidential candidates, former candidates, or when there's endorsements from important elected leaders, they just assume they've got this covered. And fine, that's all well and good. And if these party leaders are willing to accept the idea that Joe Biden, people were questioning it 6 months ago, but now they're fine with it. That's another thing. It's completely up to them. But to gaslight the rest of us is going to drive an incredible amount of resent. To pretend and try and set up that like, oh, you're out there. Now, yeah, people were sending around a video of this speech. Do we have that video of this speech that Dan Scavino, Trump's one of his campaign managers, something is sending around? It was cut off too early. Fine. People want to say like that particular video tape is, misrepresents what he said in that it cut off too early. Fine. But the idea that articulating that Joe Biden has lost a step is going to somehow enable Donald Trump is absurd. The reason why people are raising these concerns is not because Donald Trump is going to go out there and say, hey, Joe Biden's lost a step. Do you really want a president who's lost a step? That's not going to be the problem with it.
He might do that, though.
He might do that, but that's not going to keep anybody from voting to Joe Biden. The problem is that Joe Biden's lost a step, and that all the things that you need to do to win presidency may be problematic and too troublesome for him to do. That's the problem. Not that we're, now he could get lucky. He could get lucky. We could all get lucky if Joe Biden's the nominee and the convention gets canceled and the debates get canceled. And basically he can say, we're not going to have big rallies because that's dangerous for our followers. I care about coronavirus, and I'm not going to subject the citizenry to this. We're going to do this campaign in a different way, aware of the policy problems that we have. That could actually happen, and that would actually be a benefit for a guy. But you can take a look at this tape. We're not going to do the cut version. We're going to do the one that is just the uncut version. Here is Joe Biden. Full video. Here we go.
Democrat, join us. If you want a nominee who will bring this party together, who'll run a progressive, positive campaign and turn this primary from a campaign that's about negative attacks into one about what we're for, because we cannot get reelected. We cannot win this reelection. We can only reelect Donald Trump if, in fact, we get engaged in this circular firing squad here. It's got to be a positive campaign, so join us.
Okay, so he finally, he tries to get into the moment and raise the crescendo, and then he sort of he gets too overexcited, and then he pulls himself back. But this narrative is out there. And really, I just don't think the problem is that Donald Trump's going to go he's sleepy, Joe. I just don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is he is sleepy, Joe. I don't think Donald Trump pointing it out is going to be the problem. I think the problem is unless there's some intervening event like coronavirus keeps it from being a normal campaign where, he has an excuse not to fly around and can somehow sort of jujitsu that into I am being the responsible one. And that becomes the media narrative. And the media narrative is not Joe Biden's only doing one campaign event a week, not because of the coronavirus, but because he physically can't. I think that'll be fine. I just don't think that Donald Trump has the credibility if there is another narrative out there. But if that's not out there, the fact that he may not be up to this is going to be a problem.
Yeah, it's legitimately frightening. I'm not just concerned trolling when I say that.
Of course.
The forces behind Joe Biden are knowingly committing serious political malpractice right now because they know that they'll be fine if Biden loses to Trump. Whatever worse effects a Trump administration would have than a Biden administration will not fall on them, and they will still have jobs in the Democratic Party. Whereas if Bernie wins the primary, they may not.
And I think there's also a percentage of people who genuinely believe that Joe Biden at 80%, 70%, 60%, wherever he's at, is a better bet to win than Bernie Sanders is. I mean, I think that perception is probably informed by a misunderstanding of what's going on in the country, and what the dynamic is. But that's the bet that they're, I think some of them sincerely believe that he has a better chance of winning. Some of them sincerely believe that they like his politics more. They may, feel the urgency less because of their ideology and whatnot. I don't think they're, and I think that's the case. But nevertheless, it is political malpractice to have a nominee that is leaking oil. And, we're going to see that. I mean, so much so that the DNC has acknowledged it. How can anybody out there, and this is coming from a whole host of some writers from Politico who are obviously, working their access, but others who are arguing this is all sort of a narrative that's being pushed by MAGA people and left-wing people, that he has a problem. And look, that is a recipe for electoral disaster to just pretend that it's not the case.
Yeah, we're still having the primary. They're talking about it like we're doing the general election right now, and we're not.
And look, we can ignore the fact that he's got these problems during the general election, but that's not going to make them go away. It's not going to make him be able to do more campaign events. It's not the saying of it. It's the actually look at here's
this
the story.
Was in the Hill in August 15th. Biden has a tendency to make blunders late in the day, his allies say, particularly after a long swing on the road like he had last week in Iowa. They say something needs to be done to give the candidate more downtime as the candidate intensifies in the fall. Or campaign intensifies.
Now, he's won the primary, or at least he's won so far. He's winning in the primary without having to do much campaigning. But
yeah, the less the better, it seems.
I mean, maybe that's the recipe. But it is a concern.
Sure makes you feel confident.
That's what I'm saying.
But this is not by any means over yet.
No, I'm not saying it's over, but I'm making an argument that if you're worried about somebody winning, you're voting in Washington or Michigan, or you're voting in Missouri or Mississippi, Idaho, North Dakota, and you're concerned about the candidate being sort of up to this massive challenge, this is something you should be thinking about. Speaking of which, another thing you might want to be thinking about, and remember, and I think there's a huge misconception out there about how Donald Trump wins, right? And it's not a function of people are going to trust, Donald Trump is going to run to the left of Biden on Social Security. And somebody responded back, yeah, because everybody trusts Donald Trump. No, it is a complete misconception as to why Joe Biden is a liability. Because Donald Trump is not looking to convert voters. He's not looking to convert voters. He's looking to shore up all of his Republican voters. He's got 96% approval rating from them now. That may come down with coronavirus. It really might. But he's looking to shore up his voters and just convince a small sliver of Democrats not to come out. Not to come out because there's no difference between them on Social Security. Not to come out because there's no difference on them. Or, Social Security, he's just going to say, I never publicly called for cuts to Social Security. Joe Biden did. When it comes to women, and maybe Trump is not the guy who's going to say it. Maybe it's just some, maybe Eric Prince or, some right-wing billionaire will be putting out Facebook ads saying Joe Biden has a problem with women. Joe Biden had 8 people, women complain about the way that he touched them. Joe Biden, screwed over Anita Hill. Joe Biden, et cetera, et cetera.
Voted for the crime bill.
Voted for the crime bill. Joe Biden supported the Hyde Amendment. Joe Biden, like on and on and on like this. The idea isn't like, oh, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump now. The idea is like, ugh, I don't want to vote. What's the point?
There's no difference between the two.
There's no difference. That is a potential liability with a Joe Biden candidacy. Now, again, it's quite possible that we're going to get increased voter turnout from people who just want to vote against Donald Trump. Without a doubt, that's possible. It's just, this is the risk that we're taking.
We're also going to have increased voter suppression because the laws have only gotten worse since 2016.
Indeed. Here is another liability that comes with the Joe Biden candidacy. Now, again, I don't know how much of a liability like this particular dynamic is, frankly, but there's going to be hearings. We're going to have 6 months of hearings. They're going to subpoena everybody about Joe Biden, Hunter Biden. We don't know what it's going to be that they're going to, dig up, and nobody could have guessed it was the emails. There has not been a 30-year cottage industry of demonizing Joe Biden, so it's not going to be as effective as it was with Hillary Clinton. It may not be effective, but it is, again, another risk that people should be aware of before they go into the primary voting booth. Here is Donald Trump Jr. on Axios. That is not a prescription drug that makes you speedy. That is just the name of this television program.
The media, and you know where I'm going on this one, right, guys? The media would be on TV. Every telepsychologist would say, Donald Trump has lost his mind. He's in the later stages of dementia and a combination of Alzheimer's. He's not fit to run. Joe Biden doesn't know what state he's in 50% of the time. If Donald Trump did the equivalent, you would not hear anything other than that.
How much will his son be a part of that, Hunter? There's obviously been a big...
Listen, I think it's got to be a big part. I was an international business person before my father got into politics. That's what we did. I'm not going to say I haven't benefited from my father's last name, just like Hunter Biden did. That'd be foolish to say that. But I haven't benefited from my father's taxpayer-funded office. Okay? Hunter Biden, his father becomes VP.
Excuse me, so what? He hasn't benefited from his father's taxpayer funding. Oh! Donald Trump does not take a salary. Very clever.
Funded office. Okay? Hunter Biden, his father becomes VP. All of a sudden, he goes over to the Ukraine, and he's making $83,000 a month. So, the media likes to do this sort of false equivalence. You're doing this, you're doing that. We stopped doing any new international business deals when my father won the presidency. So, you know what would be great? I'll let you host it. You moderate a debate between Hunter Biden and myself. Come on. Let's do it. No, seriously. We can go full transparency. We show everything, and we can talk about all of the places where I'm supposedly grifting, but Hunter Biden isn't. I would love to do it.
The great who made more off dad debate?
No. It's talk about, hey, as it relates to the grift, they're saying we're profiting off of the presidency.
But you
Let's talk about
don't
it.
You?
I don't know that I've profited off the presidency.
We had a best-selling book. You do paid speeches.
I've done paid speeches for over a decade. I do a lot. I don't even do the international ones anymore.
You make some money off it, right?
Nothing that I haven't done before. And again, if you looked at my tax returns, which maybe we could talk about in this debate.
So you'll release your tax returns. You would release your tax returns if he would debate you? You'd really debate him?
I'd 100% debate him. Let's talk about who profited off of whose public service. Happy to do it.
Yeah.
Who profited off of nepotism is a more interesting question.
Right.
Simpler one, but...
Right.
He doesn't sound like... People sometimes get concerned about the Trump kids running for office, but he is not... Like, that body... If you just watch that, even without his weird voice squeaking above... His body language is horrible. Yeah, he's way too...
But, it's not like Trump is going on and having conversations like this with a guy like this either, right? Like they're learning from dad. You just stay out of it.
Yeah.
You just stay in your own. He's going out there because he's feeling challenged. This is his practice.
If you saw two guys talking like that at the bar, you'd wonder what they were arguing about.
Those guys are wasted.
Wonder what they were on. Exactly. I would like to see him face off against Hunter Biden
me too.
Hunter is just so much cooler than him. It'd just be like the Chad Biden versus the Virgin Trump.
This is like the problem is that like everybody wants to see that debate. And this is the problem with American society now. That debate couldn't be any less relevant about anything. And it's all that I think you could show that clip to 100 Americans and 99.8 would be like, I would definitely regular cable watch that, and I might even pay per view for that. And that's the problem.
I guess we're part of the problem.
It's we have a disease. Like this is like the Republican Party and Donald Trump is like we have like the country has an immunodeficiency syndrome, and these guys are like we're susceptible to it.
It is a good example of your point, though, that it's going to be really easy to drag Biden down in the mud with Trump.
Yeah. Calling from a 614 area code. Oh.
Hi, Sam.
Yeah.
It's Daniel calling from Australia.
Daniel from Australia.
I've been doing foreign interference and been texting for Bernie for the last month or so.
Okay.
And today I got a heap of mileage out of deviating a bit off the script and just smashing Biden on NAFTA. And pretty much all the 5 conversions I had were responding to saying that Trump demolished Hillary on manufacturing jobs, and Biden's record is worse because he actually voted for NAFTA. So I really think Bernie should be just putting that messaging out so that he can get all of the, I guess, not just the Rust Belt, but the people who are traumatized by Trump's victory over Hillary on board.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if, you would think Michigan would have been the place to do it. I don't know how much of that has come up. I imagine some has, without a doubt. We will see. We will see. I think that's a good line of attack. Like if if you're concerned about electability, that is another area where Donald Trump will get to the left of him on trade, because it's not significantly better, but the U.S., Canada, Mexico bill was better enough that a lot of people voted for it. In the Democratic Party, Chuck Schumer can't go out there and say it's a bad bill because half of his caucus voted for it. And if it's a better bill, if they fixed NAFTA, that means that the NAFTA was bad, right? And so he's going to run to the left on him on trade too. That is
just to paint a picture of how potent this was. The person, one of the examples I have here is someone who is railing about, Bernie has to tone down the socialism and the communism, and he doesn't think Medicare for all could pass. And the moment I rattled off the paragraph about Trump, Hillary, and NAFTA, he said, wow, I'm rethinking my position. I may switch to Bernie. That was very persuasive.
Wow.
So this actually this engages with people who are even afraid of the socialism tag, which honestly shocked me. I thought this was a low probability it would work, and it just got him.
Well, tweet it at majority.fm.
I cannot do that. They will fire me from the texting team if I tweet a screenshot. But I can send it to you via DM. I don't know.
Send it to majorityreporters@gmail.com.
Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah,
All
we
right.
just want to see it.
Thanks for the call.
No problem. You have a good one. Bye.
You too. Had a fun time when I was in Melbourne many, many years ago. Folks, we're out of time. I'm going to do some pre-records, and I know a lot of people have been holding on the phone. I'm sorry. We will try and get to more calls tomorrow. Not sure what we got scheduled, but I will check on that. And we will be doing coverage tomorrow night of the primaries. So tune in for that. And we will, in fact, see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know.